In 1987, a woman walked into a police station in California and told investigators that her children had been ritually abused in underground tunnels beneath their daycare center. Within months, dozens of parents came forward with similar stories. Investigators dug up the grounds. They searched for tunnels. They interviewed hundreds of children. What they found was nothing. Absolutely nothing. But by then, it was too late. The panic had already spread across the entire nation, destroying lives, shattering families, and creating a fear so powerful that we're still dealing with its consequences today. This is not a story about evil. This is a story about how the human mind creates monsters that don't exist, and why understanding this matters more than you think. What you're about to hear challenges something fundamental about how we process fear and belief. This isn't a video about promoting or condemning any belief system. This is an exploration into one of the most misunderstood phenomena in modern culture. And more importantly, it's about understanding the psychological mechanisms that allow mass hysteria to take hold of entire societies. When we talk about satanic worship, we're not really talking about a single thing. We're talking about a cultural construct that has been built layer by layer over centuries, influenced by religion, amplified by media, distorted by moral panic, and weaponized by fear itself. The question we need to ask isn't whether satanic worship is real or dangerous. The question we need to ask is why entire populations can be convinced of something despite a complete absence of evidence. Because once we understand that mechanism, we understand something crucial about human nature, about manipulation, about control, and about how easily our perception of reality can be shaped by forces we don't even recognize. Over the next 20 minutes, we're going to dismantle the mythology piece by piece, not to replace it with another belief, but to understand how fear constructs reality in the human mind. To understand how we got here, we need to go back to the very beginning of the Satan concept itself. The word Satan appears in ancient Hebrew texts, but its meaning was far more nuanced than what most people understand today. The original term meant adversary or accuser, and in the earliest texts, this figure wasn't necessarily evil in the way we conceptualize evil now. Instead, Satan functioned as a kind of divine prosecutor, a being whose job was to test human faith and challenge human assumptions. In the book of Job, for example, Satan appears in the heavenly court alongside other divine beings, and God actually gives Satan permission to test Job's faith through suffering. This is a radically different characterization than the purely evil entity we imagine today. So what changed? The transformation happened gradually through a process that scholars call theological evolution. As Christianity spread and developed its doctrines, the need for a clear personification of evil became more important. A religion built on the concept of salvation needs something to be saved from. Early Christian art began depicting Satan as a monstrous figure. Medieval literature, like Dante's Inferno, created elaborate hellscapes ruled by Satan. The Protestant Reformation brought intense focus on spiritual warfare between good and evil. By the time we reached the modern era, Satan had become the ultimate symbol of everything dark, dangerous, and damnable. But here's what's fascinating from a psychological perspective. Satan as a concept serves a very specific cognitive function. Human beings struggle with ambiguity. We need clear categories. We need to know what's good and what's bad, what's safe and what's dangerous, who's with us and who's against us. Satan provides that clarity. Once you have an embodiment of pure evil, you have a container into which you can place everything you fear, everything you don't understand, and everyone who threatens your worldview. This is why the Satan figure has been so persistent across cultures and centuries. It's not because Satan is real in any objective sense. It's because fear needs a face, and once fear has a face, it becomes a tool that can be used to control populations, enforce conformity, and justify actions that might otherwise seem unjustifiable. The Satanic Panic of the 1980s and early 90s stands as one of the most remarkable examples of mass hysteria in modern history, and it reveals something profound about how fear spreads in the information age. It began with a book. In 1980, a woman named Michelle Smith published a memoir called Michelle Remembers, in which she claimed to have recovered repressed memories of being ritually abused by a satanic cult. The book became a bestseller. Mental health professionals began using controversial techniques like hypnotic regression therapy to help patients recover supposedly repressed memories. And suddenly, thousands of people across North America began remembering that they too had been victims of satanic ritual abuse. The stories followed similar patterns: secret ceremonies in the woods, children being taken through underground tunnels, ritual sacrifice, sexual abuse performed in satanic contexts. The details were horrifying and specific enough to seem credible. Law enforcement took these claims seriously. Major investigations were launched. The most famous case involved the McMartin Preschool in California, where 7 teachers were arrested and charged with hundreds of counts of child abuse. The trial became the longest and most expensive criminal trial in American history at that time. Children testified about secret rooms, underground tunnels, and ritual abuse. Parents were convinced their children had been victimized. The media covered every sensational detail, and then the case collapsed. Investigators found no tunnels, no physical evidence of abuse. Child psychology experts revealed that the interview techniques used were highly suggestive and likely planted false memories. The charges were dropped, but the panic had already spread. Similar cases emerged across the country. Daycare workers were accused and imprisoned based solely on testimony that was later proven to be coached or fabricated. Heavy metal musicians were blamed for inspiring satanic violence. Role-playing games like Dungeons & Dragons were accused of being recruitment tools for satanic cults. Law enforcement agencies held conferences on how to identify satanic crime. The FBI eventually conducted a comprehensive investigation. In 1992, FBI agent Kenneth Lanning published a report that should have ended the panic immediately. After years of investigation, the FBI had found no evidence of organized satanic cult activity, no evidence of widespread ritual abuse, and no evidence that any of the claimed underground satanic networks actually existed. But here's the disturbing part. The panic didn't end. Many people simply refused to accept the findings. They believed the conspiracy went deeper, that the FBI itself might be compromised or incompetent. This reveals something crucial about how belief systems operate. Once people are emotionally invested in a narrative, contradictory evidence doesn't change their minds. Instead, it gets incorporated into the conspiracy. The absence of evidence becomes evidence of how good the conspirators are at hiding their activities. Here's where things get genuinely interesting from a sociological perspective. While thousands of people were terrified of imaginary satanic cults, actual organizations using satanic imagery and philosophy were operating openly, and they were nothing like what people feared. The Church of Satan was founded in 1966 by a man named Anton LaVey. You would expect this to be exactly what the panic was about, right? Secret rituals, blood sacrifice, worship of evil. The reality is almost comically different. The Church of Satan is fundamentally atheistic. They don't believe Satan is a real entity at all. For them, Satan is purely symbolic, representing individualism, questioning authority, and rejecting arbitrary moral systems imposed by religious institutions. Their central text, the Satanic Bible, reads less like an occult manual and more like a combination of Ayn Rand's philosophy and humanistic psychology. The core message is essentially this: you are responsible for your own life. You should pursue your own happiness. You shouldn't let guilt imposed by others control your behavior. You should think critically rather than accepting dogma. These ideas might be controversial. They might challenge traditional religious values, but they're not evil in any conventional sense. There are no instructions for harming others, no rituals involving sacrifice, no worship of supernatural evil entities. In fact, the Church of Satan explicitly forbids illegal activity and has strict rules against harming children or animals. Then there's the Satanic Temple, founded much more recently in 2013. This organization has become even more visible and even more misunderstood. They use satanic imagery specifically as political theater to challenge religious intrusion into government and public space. When Christian groups put up religious monuments on government property, the Satanic Temple demands equal representation and proposes installing statues of Baphomet. When religious groups push for prayer in schools, the Satanic Temple offers to lead satanic prayers. The point isn't that they actually want these things. The point is to demonstrate that government endorsement of one religion creates space for all religions, including ones that mainstream society finds objectionable. They're essentially using satanic symbolism as a rhetorical device to defend secular government and religious pluralism. They're atheistic activists using the ultimate taboo symbol to force uncomfortable conversations about religious privilege. And it works precisely because the symbol is so loaded with fear and revulsion. When a town council realizes they might have to allow a satanic monument next to their Ten Commandments display, they often decide it's better to have no religious monuments at all on government property. Mission accomplished. The Satanic Temple wins by forcing consistency in how we apply constitutional principles. So we have this strange inversion where the term satanic worship conjures images of the most evil activities imaginable, while actual organizations using satanic symbols are primarily focused on philosophical individualism and constitutional activism. This creates a profound disconnect between perception and reality. The fear is directed at something that doesn't exist, while the actual thing goes largely misunderstood because it doesn't match the narrative people expect. This is a perfect case study in how symbols function in culture. A symbol doesn't have inherent meaning. It has the meaning we collectively assign to it. And once that meaning is established through repetition and emotion, it becomes almost impossible to see the symbol as anything else. We need to address why people are drawn to satanic imagery in the first place, because this reveals something fundamental about human psychology and social dynamics. When you see someone wearing a pentagram, listening to black metal with satanic themes, or displaying Baphomet imagery, your first instinct might be to assume they're involved in some kind of evil practice. But psychological research suggests something quite different is usually happening. These symbols serve multiple psychological and social functions that have nothing to do with literal belief in or worship of Satan as an entity. First, there's the function of identity formation through opposition. Adolescents and young adults in particular are engaged in the psychological work of separating from their family systems and establishing independent identities. One powerful way to do this is through deliberate adoption of symbols and aesthetics that parents and authority figures find objectionable. If you grow up in a religious conservative environment where certain symbols are forbidden and feared, those symbols become incredibly potent tools for asserting autonomy. Wearing a pentagram isn't necessarily a statement about cosmic evil. It's a statement about personal independence. It says, I don't accept your framework for understanding reality. I make my own choices, and I'm not controlled by your fears. Second, there's the function of community and belonging. Subcultures form around shared aesthetics and values that differ from mainstream culture. Metal music, goth fashion, certain strains of punk and alternative culture have incorporated satanic imagery as part of their aesthetic vocabulary. For people who feel alienated from mainstream society, Finding a community that embraces symbols of outsider status can be deeply meaningful. The symbols mark you as part of an alternative community, as someone who sees through conventional hypocrisy, as someone who isn't afraid to question comfortable assumptions. Again, this is usually more about social identity than literal religious belief. Third, there's the function of protest and critique. Some people use satanic imagery specifically to point out contradictions and hypocrisies in religious institutions. They're asking uncomfortable questions. If your religion preaches love but practices exclusion, if it claims moral authority while covering up abuse, if it demands submission while its leaders seek power, then perhaps the real evil isn't where you think it is. Adopting the symbols that religion most fears becomes a way of holding up a mirror and asking whether the real threat to human well-being comes from symbols or from the institutions that wield fear as a tool of control. Fourth, there's simply the aesthetic appeal of darkness and transgression. Human beings are drawn to what's forbidden. We're curious about what lies beyond boundaries. Gothic and dark aesthetics have been part of art and literature for centuries because they explore aspects of human experience that polite society prefers to ignore. Death, sexuality, power, violence, the shadow side of human nature. These things don't go away just because we don't talk about them. Art and aesthetics that engage with darkness can actually be healthier than repression because they acknowledge rather than deny the full spectrum of human experience. None of these functions require actual belief in supernatural evil. They're all fundamentally about meaning-making, identity formation, social bonding, and cultural critique. The symbols are tools for psychological and social work, not portals to demonic dimensions. Understanding this completely changes how we interpret satanic imagery in culture. It's not evidence of evil influence. It's evidence of normal human processes playing out through culturally available symbolic systems. We cannot understand the persistence of satanic panic without understanding the role media plays in constructing and maintaining fear narratives. Entertainment media and news media both contributed to this, though in different ways. Hollywood has produced countless films depicting satanic cults, demonic possession, and ritual evil. From Rosemary's Baby to The Exorcist to more recent horror franchises, these narratives are commercially successful because fear is a powerful emotion that audiences pay to experience in controlled contexts. But here's the problem. Repeated exposure to these narratives shapes perception even when we consciously know they're fiction. Research in media psychology demonstrates that fictional narratives influence our sense of what's plausible and what threats exist in the real world. This is called cultivation theory. The more you consume media depicting satanic cults as real and dangerous, the more your brain treats that as background information about how the world works. Even if you would intellectually acknowledge that movies aren't documentaries, the images become part of your cognitive schema. When you then hear a news report about alleged satanic activity, your brain has pre-existing frameworks that make the claim seem more plausible than it actually is. News media amplified the panic through several mechanisms. First, there's the basic economic incentive. Sensational stories attract audiences, and audiences attract advertising revenue. A story about satanic ritual abuse is far more likely to get attention than a story about the complexities of memory, the problems with suggestive interview techniques, or the statistical rarity of cult-related crime. Second, there's the tendency toward false balance. Journalism often presents two sides to every story as though they're equivalent. But when one side is supported by evidence and the other is not, this false balance actually distorts truth rather than illuminating it. Presenting a skeptical investigator and a believer in satanic conspiracy as equal voices implies they have equal credibility when the evidence is overwhelmingly one-sided. Third, Corrections and retractions never get the same attention as initial sensational claims. When the McMartin case collapsed, it didn't generate nearly as much media coverage as the initial accusations had. Most people who remembered hearing about satanic ritual abuse at daycares never heard the follow-up showing it was baseless. Their understanding of reality is therefore based on incomplete information, weighted toward the sensational claim rather than the boring truth. This is how false beliefs persist in populations long after they've been debunked. The debunking simply doesn't reach the same audience with the same emotional force as the original claim. So where does this leave us? We've traced how an ancient religious concept evolved into a modern symbol, how that symbol became the center of a mass panic despite no supporting evidence, how actual groups using the symbol operate nothing like the feared fantasy, how individuals use the symbol for complex psychological and social reasons, and how media amplifies fear narratives beyond any proportion to reality. What's the point of understanding all this? The point is that this pattern repeats throughout history and across different contexts. The specific content changes, but the mechanism remains the same. A threatening other is identified. That other becomes associated with our deepest fears. Evidence becomes irrelevant because the emotional narrative is more powerful than facts. Institutions benefit from the fear because it grants them authority and control. Dissent from the narrative becomes suspicious itself. And by the time the truth emerges, the damage is done and the majority of people never receive the correction. We've seen this with witch trials, with anti-communist paranoia, with various moral panics about music and games and media, and we see it today with different targets and different fears. The human psychological vulnerabilities that enabled the satanic panic haven't gone anywhere. We're still susceptible to fear-based narratives. We still struggle with ambiguity. We still want clear enemies and simple explanations for complex social problems. Understanding the satanic panic isn't about Satanism. It's about understanding ourselves, our cognitive weaknesses, and how those weaknesses can be exploited. The real evil isn't in symbols or rituals. The real evil is in certainty without evidence, in judgment without understanding, in destroying lives because fear feels more true than facts. The lesson of satanic panic isn't that Satan doesn't exist. The lesson is that fear constructs realities more powerful than truth, and that understanding how fear operates is our only defense against the next panic, whatever form it takes. Because there will be a next panic. There always is. The symbol will change. The target will change. But the mechanism will be the same. And unless we understand that mechanism, we'll fall for it again, we'll participate in it again, and we'll wonder years later how we could have been so certain about something that turned out to be completely false. The question isn't whether satanic worship is real. The question is whether we're capable of thinking clearly when we're afraid. And based on history, the answer is usually no.